I wonder for how many of us, growing up, whatever context you grew up in, was it just like gender was not something you thought about, it was just a reality that you experienced? You know what I'm saying? Like, would you raise your, like, if it was that your case growing up, like, there were boys and there were girls, and there wasn't any more to say about it. That was not my experience. Growing up, the male son of lesbian moms in the 1990s, it was a different context. But boy, when most of us do grow up getting the message that it's just black and white, how do we start having a conversation about a Technicolor wonder box, a entirely different idea of gender that might involve traveling to planets beyond Venus and Mars? And it's been such a present theme in my life, and thought about it really from a very young age, and yet it took me a decade of ministry before I preached a sermon about it. My last congregation had to yank it out of me. The president of the board pleaded with me after 5 years there, would you please preach about gender? And I'm glad she did, but I didn't want to talk about it. Because how do we talk about this complex reality in a way that includes the wisdom of those of us who grew up just knowing it was black and white? The lived experience and truth of those who never questioned their own gender experience, as well as those who are living on this frontier, this horizon of gender in our current day. How do we say anything about gender that doesn't leave anybody out? I first got a kind of framework for talking about it at a church youth conference. I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and we had these radical gender activists come in and teach a conference with us. This was a Unitarian Universalist church youth camp. And they said, think about it like this. Think about these 3 different categories. Let's differentiate gender and sex and sexuality. And we actually put up pieces of paper and wrote up words and some of the words that we used to talk about these things and had them land on different paper so that gender would be the social construct. They had a nice little easy mnemonic for it. Gender is what's between your ears. So this is going to be categories like man and woman and masculine and feminine and trans and all the words that we might use to describe the social categories around gender. Between your ears. Then they said, well, and then sex is actually what's between your legs. And it's more complicated than that, but sex is biology. It's where we get male and female and intersex, where we get the qualities of XX and XY, and we know it's even more complicated than that, right? We get XXY and XYY, and we have triple X. We have this whole spectrum of more complicated sex experiences. And then sexuality, they said, if gender is what's between your ears and sex is what's between your legs, sexuality is what you do with it. But even that just starts scratching at the surface. Good distinctions to make, but just starts scratching at the surface. From everything I've heard and read, we know that there are biological realities of sex and cultural creations of gender, but where that line is, I don't think anybody has an answer. I read a book by a primatologist, Franz de Waal. You may know this guy. He studies bonobos and chimpanzees especially. He wrote a book called Different about gender, trying to get at this big cultural conversation from a different angle. He points out how it was an accident that of these 2 species that are the most closely related to humans of all primates, bonobos and chimpanzees, it was a historical accident that we studied chimpanzees first. Chimpanzees, who are the more aggressive, who organize their societies in male-dominated hierarchies, and thus began a project of explaining human nature based on our observations of chimpanzees. He says it could have worked the opposite. We could have found bonobos first, who organized their societies under female-dominated matriarchies, and who are much less aggressive and warlike, who are much more peaceful, and yet still have rigid hierarchical structures. There's a lot to say about his book. It was really quite a beautiful read, but the main takeaway for me was realizing that I had been perfectly groomed in my life to be an alpha male in a female-dominated society. More to come about that. But it's true. I'm very self-conscious about my gender experience, and so self-conscious that when I got this big truck that I drive, I didn't know what to say about it. I got it because I wanted to take care of my hip that was starting to hurt in a too small car, but I needed to say something to this new congregation I was starting with right after I got this truck, and I was trying to figure out what am I going to tell them. I had made sure I could run it on biodiesel so I could make my moral. But I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who drove a truck, and so my best line I never ended up using it, but I said I am just exploring my masculine side. The first time I was self-conscious about my own gender, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I was watching a home movie that we had taped of me dancing in a tutu. I had this pink tutu. I really loved ballet class. I was the only oversized male child in this ballet class. It didn't last long. But I had this pink tutu, and I danced around our dining room in my pink tutu, and now I'm watching the video of it with my mom. And I don't know exactly what it is about her reaction or the conversation about it that she lets slip some of our cultural worries about gender to me as I'm forming my selfhood. But I got very clear in that moment that it was a shameful, shameful thing to watch myself dancing in a tutu. That it was something to be quite worried about. Now, the deeper family history there I've shared, some of you know, my grandfather, her dad, was murdered for his unwillingness to conform to society's expectations and norms about gender and sexuality. So there is a deep danger that was conveyed, I think, in that moment. When that Christmas McDonald's had toys to give away in their Happy Meals, you would choose at that time whether you would get the boy toy or the girl toy in your Happy Meals. My mom really thought I should get the cool trucks that she wanted. I think she had said they were nice quality Tonka trucks coming in those Happy Meals. I wanted the little ballerina dolls. It was a whole panoply of them. They all had different characters, personalities. I was interested in the stories, I think. And yet again, I knew that there was something wrong, something shameful about that want of mine. And so I called them the ballerina buttheads, which is the part of the story that she remembers. And what we would do with them is set them up on the bookshelf and shoot at them with Nerf guns. Later, I started learning about the site of real gender enforcement. It wasn't at home. The site of real enforcement of gender roles and norms was the bathrooms, the locker rooms, as Chris was noting. The places where it was very clear that if you did not stick to the code of what it meant to be a boy, you were in serious danger. But I needed to say something about it. I felt this just incredible clarity that I couldn't quite fit in. And so on career day, when they said to get dressed up, we had career day at middle school, and you needed to dress up in something fancy. They said you could wear, suits or dresses. I said, oh, there, I'll wear a dress. Just like they said. I wore a dress then, and I wore a skirt to my 8th grade graduation, and it was stunning, the reaction from classmates, both an confusion, and what surprised me more was some kind of, like I'd done something heroic, a congratulatory impressedness. As I got older, I had two of the most painful social experiences I've ever had around gender when groups wanted to participate in a fishbowl conversation. We have one group on the inside and one group on the outside, divided by gender. And I felt like I didn't know how to say, I don't belong here. The conversation partners that were most valuable and vivid for me were science fiction and fantasy authors, which is what got me to this idea that we're going on an intergalactic journey around gender for the next few weeks, so thanks for humoring me. But what would it be like to visit gender, and maybe even visit your own gender, as if we were visiting another world? I have a friend, Riley, who says her gender, it's 4 parts. It's Wesley from The Princess Bride, As You Wish, and Wesley. It's a gypsy riding bareback through a field. It's Earth Mother, and it's crone. I loved that notion when she shared it of defining one's gender through a series of metaphors, of images that were unique and only her own. And I want to invite you, if you're interested in taking on a little spiritual homework assignment while we have this gender series, to create your own. If you were going to describe your gender using 3 or 4 images, metaphors, what would it be? Would you, if you take me up on that, send it to me, and we'll weave it in anonymously towards the end of this series. I remember picking up in my late teens this book, My Gender Workbook by Kate Bornstein. She's a very active trans activist who said, look, they tell us in this patriarchy we live in that the ideal gender exists, and that, of course, it's a white male body in the way that these things become intersectional. And then after page of the workbooks invites you to find out how near or far you are from that perfect ideal gender. It led to me in that late teen moment identifying as gender queer and trying to find a way to articulate my own experience that would harmonize my inner reality with other people's perceptions of me, that would allow me to just belong. I started hanging out with a group that calls themselves the Radical Fairies. Do you know about the Radical Fairies? And I discovered that there were these social norms in this different crowd where everyone could be a he, she, it, they. People played with gender in a way that was freeing and loose and liberating. One of them told me, who I'm hoping to invite and be part of this series, said, you pass until you open your mouth. In my 20s, as I began to step into this professional role, I remember an ordination, my mom's ordination. I was figuring out what to wear, and I had this flowing, multicolored orange gown. I think one of the things that drew me to ministry was wearing robes, which you'll notice I don't. But I had this. It was fabulous. Just every color, beautiful gown. And a dear friend and colleague told me, you're a new young minister and you wear that to this ordination. It will be the way that all these colleagues see you for a long time. And I put it away and wore the black robe. I realized, looking around at other colleagues who were expressing their gender at the edge of what seemed allowable, that it became the only conversation that the world would have with them. And I decided it might be okay to settle into my manhood. And most of the time, people do just read me as a man, and that's true, I am. And it's true that I gravitate towards community, towards relationships where, without having to work for it, I feel seen and known and celebrated in my complexity. How do we make a world more like that? I have a sense that if I were 16 today, growing up where I did here in Berkeley, I'd have much more language and cultural support available to me than I did 20-odd years ago. And I wonder how it would have affected my own journey towards self-acceptance. I came across this reflection from Stephen Posh, and I have a sense he might be one of those radical fairies. This reflection, it resonated with me, and I want to share it with you. And he's got some of those words you don't usually say in church. I'm not going to censor his reflection. He says, I worry about the sissy boys of earth. Call us whatever you like, gender non-conforming, non-binary. Oh, a new word, epicene, we'll talk about, this old English word. We don't need to define non-binary as against what it is, but we have a real word for it. Call us whatever you like. It used to be that sissy boys got shit from bullies, from those who, when the world outside doesn't match the world inside their heads, respond with hate. We still do, of course. But now I fear sissy boys face yet another, if different, kind of violence. I was a sissy boy, he said. I liked dolls and dress up and imagining. I wanted to be a dancer. My friends were mostly girls. If you'd asked me, would you rather be a boy or a girl, I could have easily told you. Goddess bless them, my family, mostly let me be me. It was only outside the home that I learned that it was wrong to be who I was. Believe me, sissy boys get shit from pretty much everyone, adults included. That kind of opprobrium is itself a motivator. Now I worry that sissy boys are facing a new kind of social pressure, not the pressure to conform, but the pressure to transition. If as a child they had offered me hormones and the prospect of surgery, I probably would have taken them. Goddess help me, I probably would have taken them. And for him, he says, that decision would have ruined my life. Why in the world does anyone care so much, he says? Why are they so insistent that we change our bodies or our souls to meet their stupid expectations? We're part of the natural variability of things. Why can't they just let us be as we are? The world is cruel to sissy boys. Many of us don't survive. But let me tell you something about sissy boys. And what I tell you is true. Those of us that do manage somehow to survive the hatred, the bullying, the well-meaning but ill-considered attempts to fix us are some of the strongest people that you will ever meet anywhere. We are because we have to be. There are many different ways to be a man. Each of us needs to find his own. If you're privileged to be the parent of a sissy boy, he offers, lay off. Don't think you know better than he does. You don't. Just let him be who he is. There's nothing wrong with him, body or soul. Just let him be who he is. We have managed here in our subculture, in the Bay Area and in many other places, to radically change our way of assuming things about people's sexuality. Maybe when you were growing up, it would have been an appropriate question to ask a woman upon meeting her, "What does your husband do?" That is no longer the case. We have shifted our norms about what is an appropriate assumption to make around sexuality. What would it mean to live like that with gender? Not ignoring our perceptions, our own knowing and wisdom, but more sensitive and expansive in how we navigate, aware of the limitations of our own frameworks. I think that the fewer fixed ideas about gender we hold, the more capacity and learning and growth and discovery will be available to us. So, concoct your theories about gender. Notice the ones you inherited and the ones you've developed through your own experience, and then remember they're all just theories. Hold the truth that gender is a mystery that will always offer more to be revealed. Hold RuPaul's wisdom in the back of your head. We are all born naked, and the rest is drag. The children raised in this subculture now who are embracing the wild gender rainbow world, who are living into significant unknowns. I have lots of friends who are raising kids who are epicene, non-binary from the day they're born, refusing to share their biological sex with others as they give their children that choice themselves. Or my own child's experience in kindergarten of being asked to share and choose a pronoun for themselves. We're not going to figure it out. Maybe ever, but certainly not at the first go. And all of these experiments we're doing, we need to make sure we're holding each other with tender care. I worry about when we share our names and our pronouns when we first meet one another, that we're just checking another box. We've added a third choice, but agreeing that we're going to be a part of one of these gender options. For me, gender is so much more complicated than that. I don't want to tell you about it when I first meet you. I didn't want to tell people about it for 10 years of ministry. We have to remember that the evil that we are confronting is not the gender binary or anyone's particular experience of their own gender journey and spirituality. The evil that we are confronting is patriarchy. The evil we're confronting is a system of understanding our lived experiences in relation to an idealized gender norm which no one actually embodies. Gloria Steinem offers the wisdom that though we have the courage to raise our daughters more like our sons in these past generations, we've rarely had the courage to raise our sons like our daughters. The promised land may be generations yet away. We may have only barely reached the shore where Miriam is leading us in song. And we know the cost to get even here is high. Whatever beat your drum is playing, march on. Whatever dance your feet are doing, let us dance together as we discover mysterious new ground. May it be so, and amen.